Hi, this is Gabriel and Phil from Beneficial Shock magazine. We've been invited to talk about our experience of setting up the magazine and hopefully pass on some useful and entertaining anecdotes and stories about the experience. The way we're going to do that is in true cinematic and filmic style by using a classic film reference. So we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of running and sustaining an independent magazine.
Okay, first up, the good. What's good about creating an independent magazine?
Well, Phil, I definitely think freedom would be top of my list. And it's the freedom to pursue your own personal passion. In my case, that would be film, because I've always been passionate about it since I was a kid. I've worked on quite a few different projects around film. And in terms of Beneficial Shock, being a film magazine, but being a purely illustrated film magazine, which is two areas that I was really passionate about, having something that was visual, but had something that was about, creative content as opposed to just sourcing material that was, you'd already seen it before because it was photographic or it was from films that you could recognize. So the freedom to pursue that interest, but then to do it alongside someone like you who's got the passion that comes from illustration and, editorial, art direction, and, the great community that you've worked with illustrators over the last 15 years. I think we both came in from this dual passion that fueled effectively the creation of the project. And I think if that's not there when you're setting up any project, you need to question even doing it in the first place.
Yeah, and I think our professional experience, we've talked about it quite a lot, that, you've made magazines, worked in, editorial content for film. My career, my background is illustrating editorial content for magazines and newspapers worldwide. And, you don't have control of the content. And, that is something we wanted and desired, to be able to say, look, this is what we want to say. And we wanted to set the goalposts and create a platform for illustrators and designers and writers to kind of explore and take risks with the way they make work. And that was a big part of it, I think, for us, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that risk-taking, when you set up your own publication where you don't necessarily have to do the same level of compromising that you might do, if you're working for someone else. You're in control of your own destiny. And that ability to take risks, you can sit there and actually just talk and discuss like we do about the content that we have and the people that we want to work with. And we don't necessarily have to second guess that content. I mean, you always have to think about a readership, but the ability to take the risks with the content, with the editorial stance, with the approach that we take really is a driving factor. So I definitely think the freedom is number one on our list.
So the second good thing about running an independent magazine is the collaborations and community. And the biggest community for me is the creative community, working with brilliant illustrators, photographers, designers, typographers, and Gabriel works with the writers. And working with young talent right through to kind of really well-established talent, and seeing what they create is amazing. I think that's really heartwarming and really gives you a sense of joy while working on the magazine.
And the next we would put into this community and creative community is the magazine community, which is effectively growing every year, is very different than it was about 10 years ago, because you've got a lot of people now that are supporting, the distribution and dissemination and discussion around independent publishing. People like Stack, which is a subscription-based kind of network. And you've got, Mag Culture, people like Jeremy Leslie that have written about magazines for years, but now runs a store. And it's not just in this country, it's all over the world. So you've got this much wider community that we're now a part of. And if anyone sets up their own independent magazine, depending on what area that they're exploring, if it's fashion or if it's film in the context of what we do, you start to have a voice, and you start to realize that you've got allies, you've got people around that want you to succeed as much as you want to see their stuff succeed, because we're all kind of in it together. We're pushing passion and determination and, working collaboratively and getting some great, stuff out there that is driven by passion, freedom, and a personal voice.
Yeah, and this kind of community takes your magazine or your work into kind of, readers and audiences that you wouldn't have even kind of dreamed of, really. And I think one of the ways we can gauge this is that, every week there's my inbox is full of illustrators wanting to work for the magazine, and they come from kind of really far and wide globally, and you kind of look at an illustrator's portfolio and you think, how the heck did the magazine get to Suriname? And I never even knew illustration existed there. So, it's kind of, that's a really cool community that these people wanting and thirsty to see the magazine all over the world.
So the next on the list within the good category is what we term as change or affecting change. So do you want to kick off with this section, Phil?
Yeah, I think we talk about this a lot, about ideas of how to take our disciplines forward. Gabriel teaches graphic design, I teach illustration, and we have our own ideas, and we think quite similarly about how content-driven illustration and authorial-driven illustration and graphic design is really important. And we're asking students to kind of buy into this kind of teaching approach or these ideas. So we talked about it, when we created the magazine, that we wanted to test these ideas and put them into practice.
And beyond the education side of things and the classroom, by having a magazine that goes out there and is distributed globally, it means that we can test these ideas, we can get them out there, which means that on a global scale and a far more visible scale, it's something that we're testing out a lot of these ideas, and these things go out there, and it means that we're being part of a community that starts to understand what it is that we're doing. And this is very much our commissioning policy. It's very much the the philosophy of the whole publication, which means that people can start to identify us as not just doing another ubiquitous film magazine which has got nice friendly illustration, but there's actually a backbone to it which has got a lot more integrity than just the idea of servicing content and making another aesthetically pleasing coffee table publication.
Okay, so moving on from the good, let's have a look at the bad. This isn't really bad, it's just things that you need to be prepared for, things to look out for. Let's have a look at workload. So, Gabriel, how has the magazine affected your workload?
Well, I think when you set up your own magazine, your own publication, which is sort of driven by that passion and all these things that we spoke about freedom, is the temptation is that you want to spend loads of time doing it, and it will require you to spend lots of time to do it because you're the one in charge, and you're going to have limited resources, you're going to have limited finance, you're going to have all sorts of limitations on you, but you still want to do a good job. So this preparedness that you need to have, that it will take over a big chunk of your time, and you'll be working nights, and you'll be replying to emails, and because you're setting something up which is not just you, but it's you being in control of lots of things. So you're kind of dealing with contributors, and you're dealing with printers, and you're dealing with financial stuff if you're setting up as a business, and you're kind of dealing with the financial aspect of a website if you've got a website going. So there's tons of different things that start to come into play, which means that if you can't afford to delegate that to other people, and your team is really tiny, like it was, and it still sort of is for us, is that you really have to be prepared for all of those small jobs to then eat into, just the creative aspect of making the magazine.
Yeah, I think that's that's quite right, really. I mean, the reason why you set it up is you've got these kind of things that you really want to drive forward, and you end up kind of packaging T-shirts and sending them off, and running the shop and running the accounts, and etc., etc. And you probably will take on a multiple jobs. Some of them aren't so glamorous, but you have to be prepared to do that. And the workload itself, if you don't do all those jobs, the magazine won't work, and the book stops with you. So you have to do them, and some of them are quite challenging. understanding how Companies House works to set up a corporation is quite difficult when you've never done it before and stuff like that. So yeah, the workload is a big part of it.
And the expectation I think it's worth remembering for anyone wanting to pursue this, is that you don't have to be an expert, but it's really important to do a little bit of your research, because those things can start to niggle and they can push against your kind of ambition, your drive to do it. And I think that those can be threats to, you know, the determination focus and the focus that you've got to do it. So it's really worth, and I think one thing that we really want to push home, you know, through this talk just generally, is the idea that research and doing a little bit of homework in these areas is really, really important, so they just don't come later on to undermine the entire project.
Yeah. Well, you touched upon it there, Gabriel, expectation. And I think that, you know, we wanted to talk about expectation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, how has expectation been for you? How do you manage it?
Well, I think, again, it's really important to just be realistic when you're setting something up like this. Is don't instantly feel that it's going to be a massive success. Because although you're passionate about it and you think it's the best thing since sliced bread that you're producing, and you've got this fantastic thing and you've got all these people, you know, kind of contributing, and you think you've got this great product that is just going to fly off the shelves, is you have to be prepared for that to take a long time. And it's the long game that you're playing when you're doing independent magazines, because, you know, although you're given the impression that, you know, everyone is doing stuff online and, you know, everything becomes successful very quickly, I think what you have to do is focus on the work. Focus on doing the best project you possibly can within your certain limitations and restrictions, which is another thing about making sure that, you know, when you've got a budget or you're setting yourself a budget, is be realistic about that. So this whole idea of the expectations is, you know, don't get into the trap of spending a huge amount of money producing something without necessarily looking at how you're going to make money back, or even thinking about the minimum amount that you'll make back, so that you can continue to do that. Because there's no point just doing one magazine, spending a fortune on it, and then it going bust because you don't have money that's coming back.
Yeah, I think also, for me, like the expectation, I realised very quickly that everything takes much longer than you really want it to take, and Oz Magazine set up a system where they just basically created content until it was ready, and I think we've had to work along those lines because it's so much of our own time that we're doing it. I think also with expectation, we had this really amazing idea, because it's filmed, to kind of make an animated version that you could watch in the cinema, and you know, we've made some kind of animated elements, but it was far too grand an idea, really. So expectation is something you need to really think about.
So the next section to cover is about selling the magazine. So can you tell us a little bit about that to begin with, Phil?
Yeah, just following on from those roles, it was my role to find stockists and kind of manage that, and send them out, the magazines out, and get the payments in the first couple of issues. And I managed to get about 50 stockists all over the world, and it took a huge amount of time to manage that. And, you know, some stockists are more keen to pay than others. And, you know, so I think it's a huge drain on your resources. And, you know, I kind of like, my entire flat were like covered in magazines at one point. So I think that's something to kind of think about, selling magazines. And then we got 50 stockists. We thought, come on, let's go and get a distributor. So Gabriel took up the role of researching distribution and liaising with distribution. And
yeah, and it felt, you know, initially it felt great to have a distributor, because it felt like, you know, we were a proper successful magazine, which meant that someone was willing to carry it and do a lot of that work for us, you know, kind of doing the mailing, you know, sending stuff out, which is very costly, you know, kind of chasing invoices and all those things that Phil was spending a huge amount of time, you know, doing. But, you know, it's not, you know, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when you get a distributor on board, because in a way you've got to be prepared for having far less income, because they take a big chunk of the income. They've got, you know, sometimes 500, 600 other magazines that they're promoting. So you're still in a big sort of network of publications that they're trying to circulate and get into stores. So they do the work for you, but there's also the delay in terms of the payment, because a lot of times, through the process is that you might have to wait. If you're a biannual magazine like we are, or an annual magazine, you might have to wait 12 months to get payment for the previous magazine, because they have to then collect all the magazines back from the outlets that they work with before they'll even consider paying you. So there's all these delays that are set into place. So you need to be prepared and do a little bit about your homework and understand the fact sheets that they send through to you, and don't just gloss over them, but realize that it's going to take quite a while. So if you're dependent on purely money coming from the sales of your magazine, just be prepared for that big delay.
Yeah, also selling the magazine through social media and developing following and developing your kind of like identity. I think is is not something that has been that fruitful in terms of sales. I think it's been quite interesting and imaginative how we've tried to use social media, although it's very, very difficult to keep on top of it, isn't it, Gabriel? It's quite a drain on resources.
Yeah, it's a massive drain on resources, because everyone now who's got a publication has got an Instagram account, has got a Twitter, might have a Facebook page, might have all these things, and it feels that the drain that puts on you is that they constantly has to be updated, because we're living in a world where you feel like you always have to be forward facing, because everyone's fighting for the same dollar or pound or whatever it is that when they're selling a publication. So there's the assumption that when you've got all this social media, someone's got to do something. They've got to upload content, and they've constantly feel like they have to engage with the audience. And if you don't have someone that's specifically taking on that role, and you yourself are not an expert, you're going to feel like that's another one of those jobs, going back to the workload that we discussed before, that it's an extra thing that you have to do, which pulls you away from doing the work. So I think there's a big myth around the idea that social media solves all the problems that you've got. And if you've got 5,000-10,000 followers, it means that you're the most popular thing out there, which you're not. It just means that you have to service that. So it's an extra job that you have to take on board. So we're not saying don't do it, but we're saying that if you are doing social media, is just take it with a pinch of salt, that it's not going to solve all your problems. You might need just to update once a week or something.
Yeah, likes don't equate for sales, really. Okay, so the third and final section, the ugly. This is just when things are a bit out of your control, or areas that you wouldn't want to really happen but do happen. So firstly, we just look at when things just don't work out. So Gabriel.
So yeah, one of the main things that every magazine has to face is when contributors pull out. So you might be relying on content coming in, and we've got a schedule, and we've got a flat plan, and we've got deadlines for things to come in, and they just don't. And you can't put too much pressure on contributors, especially if you've got limited budgets and limited facilities and resources, to force the issue too hard. So being a good communicator and knowing how to deal with that issue, because it can get ugly. But don't have too many expectations that everything's going to work perfectly, but being able to roll a little bit with those challenges and those difficulties that come up.
And also, when contributors, file the work and it's just not what you had expected it to be, and these kind of things do happen from time to time, where you commissioned a great illustrator, you've got a great idea, for whatever reason it just doesn't pan out as you expected it to, and it could be from your side or from their side, and we do try and make everything work as best we can, but sometimes it just doesn't work, and being honest with people is probably what I would suggest is the best route, really. And in the main, everybody who hasn't quite made it into the magazine has been quite understanding, but obviously this is something you wouldn't want to deal with. Another thing that we think is a bit on the ugly side is stamina.
Yeah, and it is something that's kind of underrated, not spoken about, probably because it's not a particularly glamorous thing to talk about. But this goes back to the passion, determination you might have to make a magazine and to run a project like this. But you need to have the stamina to deal with all the challenges, not just the hard work, but all of these things that we're talking about in this section, which is about, contributor expectations, the people that you work with. If you're in partnership like Phil and I are, it's about, managing a relationship and the expectations that we both have about, what we want to get out of this publication and how we want to run the project. So that stamina and that ability to kind of push on when things get difficult, and if money isn't coming in, or you're having difficulty with distributors, or there's loads of different challenges that you'll face, but being able to push ahead and find ways of keeping that energy going through a project, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, and the final thing I think we want to touch on, which is the ugliest thing of all, is money. And you might have to put your hands into your own pocket at a certain point. You might be owed money, might not be forthcoming. It might be that, you've just, your sales have dipped or whatever, and you might just have to put some money, your own money in. And that's something that, these kind of projects where you're trying to challenge the status quo, you've got an idea you want to follow through, you have to do sometimes, and that's one thing you have to be aware of.
And I think the last thing in this category, just to wrap up, is there's loads of different business models out there for running magazines, and some pay their contributors for their content. Other people are doing things through goodwill, just primarily because, like we were saying, is that when you start up, you might not have the resources. You're driven more by passion and like a shared desire to make something happen. But whichever direction you take, just make sure that when you're contacting contributors or people that are getting involved in the project, is be honest with them about the way that you do things. So if you're not paying people, do that from the start. Make sure that within your dialogue, with your emails with people, they know that from the beginning, because that is something that can get a little bit ugly, is when people have expectations that it's going to run one way and it's actually the opposite. So honesty, I think, about money is really, really important.
So just to conclude, we've used the structure of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which is obviously Sergio Leone's classic film. And running a magazine, you are going to have good elements and bad elements and ugly elements, and that's what makes the full package. But we've enjoyed all aspects of it and are still learning, still reflecting, still creating, and that's what's exciting about it. And hopefully you enjoyed the talk, and thanks for listening.